use of this funding has been reviewed and it is largely supporting the recruitment and retention element of our strategy. So we've included a continuation of that market premium in the growth requirements. The next line is around our educational psychology service and again relates to the significant increase in education, health and care plans which require an assessment through our educational psychology team. So the growth we've included is to employ a further 4 main grade psychologists in order to undertake these assessments. The next item of growth is as a result of the loss of the SEND reform grant that was given to us in order to implement the SEND reforms. And the DFE confirmed in 1920 that this grant would no longer be there, and therefore we've had to include some growth as a result of the continuation of functions that were funded through that reform grant. And then the final 2, one of them relates to the pupil referral unit, which is an increase in our transport budget of £500,000 and it's growth to reflect the increased demand in that area to transport children from their home to our Oakfield pupil referral unit. And the final growth area is around unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, which includes £0.75 million for 2021, rising to £1.5 million in 23-24. And the demand on this budget does continue to increase and has done over the last few financial years and is a direct result of an increase in the number of children coming into the county and presenting as unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. To date, there is a total of 103 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children for whom we have responsibility, and that's compared to 89 in April 19 in numbers. So whilst the Home Office has increased funding for this area, it isn't sufficient to cover the full costs related to supporting children, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So I'll stop there, Chair, for questions.
Much. Mr. Sheehan.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to ask a question about paragraphs 13 and 14 on page 17. How sustainable is that figure of 20.895 million, and can you see any way of reining in the 13.6 million projected growth in the next 4 years in social care placements?
So the growth requirements that we've set out for the department are based on the premise that if we take no action to reduce demand, nor any action to change the way in which we're working, we will require additional social workers and our demands for social care placements will reach that peak. So what we are doing within the department is looking at how we can work as a whole system to reduce the demand coming in and thereby reduce the growth requirement in the budget. And in relation to the social care placements, we'll come on to it in the next presentation. We've got some work that's been undertaken over the last couple of years around our care placement strategy that is seeking to reduce the unit cost of placements for our children in order to reduce that growth projection.
Yeah, if I'll just follow up by trying to understand a little more some of the elements that are presented in the paragraph. You talk about children entering the system with significant and complex needs. Does that mean they've entered the social care placement system with complex needs from another part of the system, or we just didn't know about their needs when they entered our services at all? Also, what are these market factors that are increasing the costs?
I'll provide some detail, Chair. In relation to youngsters coming in with more complex needs, some of those youngsters will have been identified and will be being worked by other parts of the service. But in the main, they are the youngsters that are being identified more around our understanding and knowledge about criminal exploitation. So we've got young people who are coming in often at an older age, who are seen very much as victims of exploitation, that have far more complex needs than we would have been dealing with perhaps 4 years ago. So that is putting a particular pressure on the service for the type of placement that's required for those youngsters. That's coming at a time when the market is really very difficult and challenged about the type of places that are available to meet those young people's needs, and from a private marketplace of increased cost placement unit costs for those young people. So we've got a combination of youngsters with far more complex needs requiring to be looked after, a reduction in the number of available placements, and providers charging higher costs for those placements.
In terms of addressing these rather challenging growth needs, is there no sort of sense of a solution that involves prevention? Could we not be? Well, obviously there is, so let's hear more about it.
Yes, we're working, and as Jane's outlined, the next presentation that's around the Children's Innovation Partnership that will look at the work we're doing around service redesign for residential care. Also as an element of the preventative work. So we've been doing a lot of work around those youngsters on the edge of care, how we work with partners and other agencies to provide levels, wraparound services for those young people, and how we can work with families as part of family networks to actually, wherever possible, keep those young people at home or within their wider community.
Can I have just one more question in this section? Okay, paragraph, well, it's G4. You're talking about a new operating model for social care staff. Could you explain what that's based on? Is there anything that you're looking at now that you're trying to replicate here?
At the moment, we're in the early stages of looking at the department, across the department, around kind of different ways of working in order to reduce demand. So back in April last year, we launched a programme called Defining Children's Services for the Future, which essentially is looking at the taking a department-wide look at how we can continue to deliver best outcomes for children within an increasingly challenging financial picture. So at the moment, we're in the really early stages of that, and are working with our colleagues in Barnardo's and others to identify what that might look like. So at the moment, there isn't a kind of clear outcome of that, but it's work that the department is going to start and indeed needs to do.
Thank you, Chair. Back to the initial premise of Sean's first question about the 20 million, and it might well be that this is aimed more at Ivan than at officers. Surely 20 million isn't the sort of figure that this council could deliver within the envelope that we've got at the moment. So if we don't do something about demand, we've got a problem coming down the line that isn't resolvable. And I just wondered, does Ivan know some secret funding that's coming down the line that's going to give us an extra 50 million for the county council?
The answer to your question, Jeff, is there is no additional money coming down the line. But for me, as the lead member over the last few years, what I've been very gratified by is the leader and deputy leader who is the resources person in terms of putting additional money into children's social care, which from memory, and I wouldn't want to mislead you, is already at a £40 million increase over the last 5 years, and that 20 million will be found. We have statutory duties, Chair, that have to be met, and they will be delivered.
We don't seem to have any other questions or points on this section. So if you'd like to move on to the next section, which I believe starts paragraph 15. No, we haven't finished.
Thank you. So if I can take you to paragraph 15, I'll carry on with savings and an overview of the dedicated schools grant. So details of the proposed savings for the local authority budget are set out in full in Appendix B, and they total 1.9 million for 2021 and a further total 4 million over the next 4 years. But in addition to this, the High Needs Development Plan also aims to ensure sustainable services for children and young people with special educational needs within the High Needs block of the Dedicated Schools Grant. And in order to achieve this, significant cost reductions are required over the period of the MTFS. So in relation to the detail of each savings item, I'll go through each one briefly in turn. The first saving is around a new departmental operating model. The target remains unchanged from 1819, and this has been achieved through a new head of service structure and also a review of our business services bit of the department. In relation to CF2, which is around a reduction in social care placement costs, this is a saving of 1.5 million for 2021, rising to 3.6 million in 23-24. So this is a merger of 3 previous targets, which were around savings as a result of increasing our mainstream and specialist foster care placements, and also savings targets as a result of our missile service. We'll go into more detail in the next presentation around our partnership with Bernardo's, but essentially this savings target is around us now reducing that unit cost of social care placements for our children. The next savings area was the early help review, and members will recall that we did a full review last financial year that achieved 1.5 million savings through the establishment of the Family Wellbeing Service. The next savings target is associated with the review of staff absence. Staff absence targets have been allocated to all departments based on our intention to meet or exceed the council target of 7.5 days. Significant progress has been made within the Children and Families Department through the robust application of absence management policies and also the use of star chamber meetings and monthly absence reporting to DMT. And then finally, the final savings area is around academy conversions, which is £30,000 by 2021. The charging for academy conversion was introduced in 1718 and was based on the DfE's expectations that more schools would move into academies or be required to convert. So the adjustment that we've included for this MTFS removes the income target as a result of changes in national policies, which has meant that fewer academies are now fewer schools are converting to academies. And then in relation to savings under development, as you've heard in the previous section, the department has significant pressures around growth areas, so does continue to work with the transformation unit and Bernardo's to look at how we can deliver things in a different ways and achieve value for money, as well as improving services for children and families. So the current activities are particularly targeted at containing demand, but also reducing the need for growth. So in that area, we've got the Children's Innovation Partnership, which you'll hear the presentation on shortly, but also the service redesign for SEND services, which is contributing towards the recovery of the high needs deficit. There are other measures that will need to be identified and developed to meet the remainder of the £4 million savings target for the department. So I'll go into detail around the Dedicated Schools Grant. For 2021, the Dedicated Schools Grant remains calculated in 4 separate blocks: the Schools Block, the Central School Services Block, High Needs Block and the Early Years Block. The Schools Block totals 417.9 million and consists of the school formula funding, which is fully delegated to schools, and the schools growth funding, which is held centrally. And in respect of this formula, for 2021, it represents a cash increase of 6% for growth, 6%, which for growth is an increase of 29%. And I'll come on to schools funding in a bit more detail in a bit. In relation to the Central School Services Block, this funds some of the historic financial commitments related to schools, things like premature retirement, but also some of the other budgets related to schools that are centrally retained. In terms of the allocation for 2021, this has reduced as the government are anticipating that the local authority, or there will be not as much need for these elements going forward. So overall, there's a decrease of 4% over the 1920 baseline on this block. The high needs element of the dedicated schools block totals an estimated 74.8 million for 2021, and it funds our special schools and also other specialist providers for pupils with high needs. It also funds our pupil referral unit and those support services that support children with special educational needs and disabilities. The grant allocation for this budget does include the additional funding that was announced by the DFE last year and is an increase of, that should read 7% from the 2019-20 baseline. And then the final block is the early years budget. This funds our free entitlement to early education and also the element of for 2, 3 and 4 year olds. And the position on this block is an increase of funding in each of the banding areas. So the 2021 MTFS does set the overall schools budget as a net nil budget at local authority level. However, there is an annual funding gap of 10.5 million. This is predominantly in the high needs area, which will be an overspend on the grant. And for deficits on the budget that exceed 1%, local authorities are required to submit a recovery plan to the DFE, and it is expected that we will be required to make that submission at the end of this financial year. So in relation to the schools block, the 2021 funding does see further movement towards the national funding formula, and that aims to fund all pupils at the same rate, irrespective of the authority in which they're educated. However, funding levels between local authorities and individual schools within local authorities will still vary as a result of the different pupil characteristics rather than the national funding levels. In paragraph 22, we've detailed the national position in relation to the national funding formula and Leicestershire's response to that. And in paragraph 23, we've set out how we use the fund that funds the initial revenue costs of additional primary and secondary places. So just a bit to finalise this section on the school funding formula. So nationally, schools receive a minimum per pupil funding increase, or will receive a minimum per pupil funding increase of about 1.84% per pupil, with no capping on these increases. And whilst there's no timescale for the implementation of the halved formula of the national funding formula for 2020, the minimum per pupil funding levels of 3,750 for primary and 5,000 for secondary have been made mandatory. So despite the overall increase in the budget, at individual school level, 32% of primary schools and 2% of secondary schools will remain on the funding floor with an increase of 1.84 per pupil. And these schools, despite the additional funding, will experience a real terms decrease in their income. So the 18-19 and 19 school funding formula was agreed by Cabinet in January 2018, and it largely mirrored the national funding formula. We did undertake consultation with schools in October 2019 about the introduction of 2 additional factors, that of sparsity and pupil mobility. And in November last year, the Schools Forum considered those changes and agreed to their inclusion in the 2021 school funding formula. So the introduction of these 2 factors will ensure that the Leicestershire formula does fully now reflect the national funding formula. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I move into questions, if I could just take you back to page 23 under the high needs block. At the top of the page 23, it says Leicestershire receives £1 million through this element. Is there any clarification on that?
Yes, apologies, there's a typo there. It should read 2.1 million.
Thank you.
Chair, the other figure missing is the rise.
Sorry, yeah, that's 7%. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Sheehan.
Yeah, just looking at the early help review, obviously that's bedding in quite well, but we still don't know the long-term impacts of that. That's something we need to keep a very close eye on. You mentioned about criminal exploitation and the costs that can have in terms of us having to pick up the pieces later on. Would you say there's potentially a link between vulnerable families that are not being supported as well as they might be, and criminal exploitation coming in and taking advantage of that later on?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, there is a link between vulnerable families and criminal exploitation. What we do know, and as members will recall, we didn't take money from frontline staff through the early help review, so the 1.5 million savings were achieved through a reduction in buildings and also a reduction in management. So we were able to continue to support families at the same level that we were supporting prior to the removal of the 1.5 million. What we have done as part of the growth that we've received for 2021, as well as part of the review for the Children and Families Wellbeing Service, is strengthened our work with more vulnerable young people. So we've strengthened our work around one-to-one youth work provision, as well as putting in some additional resources for those children who are being criminally exploited.
Mr. Phillimore.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just double check with Gemma? I just want to be absolutely clear whether I need to declare, because my wife is employed in early years SEND, but it's not named here as to where she is.
Thank you very much. We now move on to the next section, which I believe starts at high needs block on page 25. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So if I can take you to paragraphs 27 onwards, section titled High Needs Block. So as we've previously raised with members of the committee, the escalating cost of providing SEND services is one of the main financial pressures impacting both Leicestershire and local government nationally. And this is reflected in the draft MTFS, which was presented to Cabinet in December, where the expenditure was forecast to exceed the available grant by 6 million in 2021, which will result in a cumulative deficit of 13 million by 21-22. Following confirmation of pupil destinations for the 1920 academic year, the demand for packages to support pupils was found to have significantly increased over the year. In addition to that, the unit costs for placements at special schools and mainstream have also increased. So through the High Needs Development Plan in 1920, we have put an additional 90 places into the system, which were made available. However, this additional capacity has been filled up simply through an increase in the overall demand and has not allowed us to reduce the use of more high-cost provision. So whilst the additional capacity still has a positive cost avoidance impact, and we've totaled that to be around about 2.2 million, we know that it's still not sufficient to meet the needs that we have across the county. So the draft MTFS is now being updated before it's being presented to Cabinet for approval, and it will reflect the changes that I've just set out above. So what it now means is that in 2021, it's estimated that the funding gap will be 11 million, assuming that these current demand trends that I've described continue. And this means that the cumulative deficit, incorporating the 3 million additional expenditure from this year, is expected to total 19 million at the end of 2021. And a forecast is currently being developed for future years. However, the financial deficit is expected to continue to rise. So the department are investigating a number of actions that could, over the course of the MTFS, reduce demand and therefore the overall deficit. In September 2019, the government did announce that there would be additional high needs funding of 700 million nationally. We've equated this to 5.5 million for Leicestershire, but it still doesn't provide enough money to cover the outgoings across the high needs block. So the provisional high needs block element of the dedicated schools grant is now 74.8 million. And we have developed a high needs development plan, which sets out our approach to planning, commissioning and delivering SEND services. And it's focused on 3 key areas, predominantly around inclusion, the development of our commissioning areas, and also the development of a range of cost-effective, high-quality local provision. And the project is taking a holistic view of the whole SEND system. It's now fully staffed and is mobilised, ready for the rest of this year into 2021. Leicestershire does continue to invest in developing additional specialist provision to reduce the costs, and the 2021 MTFS continues that approach and includes a proposed capital programme of 17.8 million and recognises that a further 10 million may be required to build a new additional special school in the future. I've detailed in paragraphs 37 to 38 the consultation that took place last year with schools around a transfer between the schools block of the dedicated sport grant into the high needs block, which members will recall School Forum voted against, and then Cabinet agreed to postpone the transfer from this year with a consideration of it happening in future years. So at the moment, a DSG deficit has been able to be carried forward to the following year with the approval of the Schools Forum. However, DfE have recently removed the need for Schools Forum approval to carry forward a deficit and prohibits local authorities from contributing to the DSG without the approval of the Secretary of State. This will require local authorities, therefore, to set aside revenue funding to offset the liability of the cumulative deficit, and that will require expenditure reductions in other areas of the local authority. If I can just take you briefly to the central services block. The central services, as I've already mentioned, funds a number of school-related expenditure items, and the DfE did state their expectation that over a period of time these historic costs would begin to unwind, and therefore there's been a reduction in this grant for 2021. In terms of the early years block, nationally early years funding has increased by 66 million. The grant remains determined by the number of children participating in early years education, and the funding supports the 30 hours free entitlement to early education for eligible parents and the continued delivery of the early years offer for disadvantaged 2-year-old. And then in relation to other funding sources for the department, the grants are largely received from the DfE, who to date haven't confirmed many of the grant allocations. It's assumed at the moment that those grants will continue at the same level as they are in 1920. But the lack of certainty does place significant challenges on the department in terms of our future financial planning. And we've detailed the list of those specific grants on pages 27, 28 of this document, along with some detail of what the grant funds. I'll stop there.
No comments? Thank you very much, Jane. So, Mr. Sheehan.
It's actually not a question. I think it's this business about having to set aside revenue funding to offset liability, to prop up the DSG budget with that deficit, and it's going to require expenditure reductions in other areas of the local authority. This is a big worry. I mean, we're making ourselves extremely unpopular, but, you know, for good reason. I don't think the authority can continue to take this kind of a hit year after year after year. So something's got to give.
Yeah, this is a national funding issue, and as you've highlighted, the local authority can't sustain the level of overspend that the high needs block is threatening to deliver. So whilst we do have a programme in place to reduce the demand on the budget and indeed move to align our expenditure, it is a national issue around the amount of funding that is coming into local authorities in order to fund the provisions within the high needs block and indeed deliver the code of practice that was set out in 2014. But it does place significant financial risk for the local authority.
No, thank you very much. And we go on to the capital programme.
So to end, I'll just briefly detail the capital programme. The draft Children and Family Services capital programme totals 127 million over the next 4 years, and that includes 31 million for 2021. The draft programme and funding is outlined or is summarised in Appendix C. It is envisaged that over the next 4 years of the MTFS, we will have put in an additional 5,900 mainstream school places and an additional 500 places for children and young people with special educational needs. And the programme is partially funded by external grant and developer Section 106 contributions. So the basic need grant is received from the DFE, and it's based on the need to create additional school places. The strategic maintenance grant is received from the DFE for the maintenance of maintained schools only. Section 106 contributions are estimated to total 68.3 million. It's estimated that we will receive a total of 68.3 million of Section 106 contributions to fund the proposed programme, 8.9 million of which are in 2021. And then the SEND Provision Capital Grant, it was announced in 17-18 and confirmed at 1.2 million in 2021. And then we have submitted and were successful in receiving a free school bid, and that includes £8 million of funding from the DFE to build a 50-place special educational needs school for children with social, emotional and mental health needs in Shepshed. So the draft capital programme for 2021 to 23-24 is set out in the table on page 30, and the programme has been developed on a priority basis and within the schemes and there are a number of schemes at different stages in development. The programme is focused on two significant areas, and that is the need to provide additional primary school places based on the assessed need, and also the basis annual school capacity, which provides the basis for the basic need capital grant. In terms of the 2021 capital programme, the schemes are focused on the need to develop additional primary school places around the county, and the programme also includes Section 106 developer contributions of around about 65.8 million to deliver these new schools. The programme does include the total 9.8 million investment in SEND provision that I've outlined earlier, which is expanding our special schools, increasing the number of SEND units and developing a number of special schools that will result in a total of 500 additional SEND places. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr.
Just a really straightforward question, I think. I'm just curious, what percentage of our early years and state education children are now qualifying in SEND?
We know the overall proportion of children in mainstream school that qualify for SEND, that's 3.1%. What I don't have to hand is the figures for early years, but we can get that. So 3.1%. Yeah, 3.1% of our school population have an education, health and care plan, and I think it's about 8.9%. I can get the proper figures as SEND support. What I don't have at the moment is a breakdown of that, but we can get that.
It's fine, Chair.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure you've got an answer for this. Paragraph 47. I'm surprised that Oadby, Wigston are not mentioned as areas that need funding for additional school places with all the house building that's going on, because people are inquiring. I was told there's 106 money coming in and it doesn't seem to be there. I would have asked about Kidworth as well, but I see masses of houses going up there, but
So the capital programme is based on the need for school places based on the population in Leicestershire. So wherever there are housing developments going up, there will be a Section 106 request made for education provision based on the number of houses. So if the number of houses leads to the need for either additional school places or indeed new schools, they'll be built into the capital programme.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that presentation. We now, thank you, Jane. It's a very complicated paper, but you've made it very clear for us. We're now moving, as was agreed at the beginning of the meeting, to item 12, which is the Children's Innovation Partnership presentation. And I'd like to welcome Nadine Good from Bernardo's. Welcome. And I understand it is Jane and Nadine who are going to give this presentation. So if everybody can see, thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm joined by my colleague Nadine Good, who is the Assistant Director for Barnardo's, who is also our partner and part of my department management team as a result of the partnership. So I'll kick off with the beginning of the presentation, and Nadine is going to pick up on the next bits. So we were faced with a significant problem over about 18 months ago, where we'd identified that we've got an increase in the number of looked after children in Leicestershire, and I've outlined in the previous report what that increase is looked at. But that was coupled with a lack of local placement sufficiency to meet the need and demand being presented, not just by the increase, but by the complexity and different needs of those children. And as we've described, that the complexities that we were seeing for those young people were far more complex, and also quite a significantly different age profile as well. The other issue is our budget pressures, which again you've heard of, and our projections for growth over the next few years. But also we have been in a position where we've been undertaking very traditional transactional commissioning and not really been able to provide a very flexible response to the needs of the children, or indeed the development of flexible services for our children. And we identified that there was a lack of internal and external whole system thinking about the needs of those children, but also we had limited capacity to create and embrace innovation. So we set about an ambition a while ago, which was around developing a different commissioning model that was based on relationships and built on trust and shared value base around belief in wanting to develop the best provision for our children and young people, as well as being able to meet those children's needs. And what we wanted to do was create a children's service innovation alongside a partner that we could work with and certainly shared those values with us in order to improve outcomes for Leicestershire people. So we set about quite an ambitious ambition around working with another partner to co-design, co-produce, co-deliver, co-invest in children's services. And it required a completely different method of contracting and working with a partner on a non-transactional basis, but on a real mutual partnership basis for best outcomes for children in Leicestershire. And we wanted to create some service flexibility to respond to what we were doing in terms of delivering a crisis-led interventions, but make sure that we could be much more agile in our approach to and to kind of redefine the scope and purpose of what we wanted to deliver for children in Leicestershire. But we also wanted to work with a partner who would enable us to develop new concepts, but also ensure that what we were delivering was adding significant value, both in terms of monetary value, in terms of what we were spending, but also in terms of outcomes for children. So the result of this work is that we went out for procurement for a partner that assessed the suitability of a partner rather than a commission service. So we went out to commission a relationship essentially with another partner who would work alongside us with our challenges. We've gone out and we have a maximum 10-year contract. And it's a two-tier contract, so it exists as part of a collaboration agreement that enables us to also deliver services through that partner. So it's a two-tier, so we can work with that partner, but we can also deliver services through that partner as well. So we put out an invitation to tender, and that was evaluated, and we held a number of interviews with interested parties, and this was back in 2018. We were really pleased that the contract was awarded to Barnardo's in November 18, and the partnership started in December 18. And over the year, and Nadine will talk some more about some of the successes, but over the year, it's now been recognised in a number of forums as one of the first innovation procurement partnerships that's happened kind of across the country, and has certainly led to some significant interest from our partners. So I'll hand over to Nadine, who's going to talk about some of the successes so far.
Okay, thank you, Jane. The successes that we've had so far, I'll just outline what they are, and obviously you may have some questions, which is fine. We quickly developed the Children's Innovation Partnership Board, which essentially was a partnership between Leicestershire Children and Family Services and Barnardo's, so that we had a layer of governance and accurate reporting on the progress of the partnership. We identified strategic leads from each organisation, and as Jane said, and introduced myself as an assistant director from Barnardo's, embedded within the DMT within Leicestershire. So I'm here for a minimum of 3 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week, to ensure that we have that embedded presence within the DMT team. And I can't emphasise enough how important that has been to learn and better understand the business of Leicestershire and the needs of Leicestershire children and families. We have a shared trust and vision, and that has run through every aspect of co-production and co-design that I've worked on, whether it's been bringing Barnardo's subject experts in to support Leicestershire colleagues or vice versa. And again, I think that's one of the core priority areas if you're going to enter into any partnership, is that shared trust and vision. And it's been very heartening for me, representing Barnardo's, to work with Leicestershire colleagues and seeing that. We have worked on 2 design briefs thus far. The first one was around the residential care provision, and we are at a point now where we have delivered the findings and the outcome of the first service design brief. What we mean by service design brief is an outline of the issue, an outline of the problem that's presented to us through the board, and then we work in collaboration to define the solutions for that, using engagement of all significant stakeholders, but most essentially the voice of the child has to come through really strongly. In order to ensure that we design services which meet children's needs directly. The second service design brief is underway, and we're looking currently at short breaks provision, and also a third which is looking at the SENDIAS service. So we currently have 3 live service design briefs at different stages of progress. We have, as I said, consultation with Barnardo's as subject matter experts. And what that means is that when we're identified through the SIP board an issue or a problem that Leicestershire has been looking at, we bring together different subject experts from Barnardo's to sit alongside Leicestershire experts. It's most essential that we hear from the front line of Leicestershire children, young people, families, staff, to help us understand inherently what the problems are, and then also engage with all the stakeholders to find a joint solution. This is I can't stress enough how much this is about joint working to find solutions. We have independently commissioned an evaluation from the University of Bedfordshire. That was done to evaluate the innovation partnership itself. At this stage, in year 1, it would be almost impossible to evaluate the impact directly for children and families because we've been in the service design phase. But that year 1 evaluation will demonstrate a blueprint as to how local authorities can engage with other organisations to work in the way that Leicestershire have been a front runner on. And that should be available for everyone to see in February, which is a culmination of year 1. And as Jane outlined, we've had a lot of local and national interest. So myself and Liz Perfect, Head of Commissioning for Leicestershire, have attended a number of conferences where other interested parties have wanted to find out what were the drivers for Leicestershire to take this approach and what have been the successes, what have been the challenges throughout the journey. And there has been quite a lot of profile about that, and various publications, for example, in Children and Young People Now, which is really positive again for both sides of the partnership to be able to showcase and also share what some of the challenges have been. It's very important that we look upon these experiences as lessons learnt and not just as total overall successes. Speaking of successes, that was a good segue. Jane did outline that we have had a number of joint successful bidding applications. And what this has really involved is Barnardo's to use its expertise in business development to again work alongside Leicestershire and look at where there are opportunities to bring new revenue streams into the authority. Some of these have been delivered by Barnardo's, but some of them have actually been delivered by Barnardo's and other partners across the authority. So you can see here that in the summer term, we delivered a healthy activity and food contract across Leicestershire, which provided a means to address school holiday hunger. So children who would be eligible for free school meals during school term would be receiving food, obviously, but in the summer holidays there were issues around school poverty hunger, and we successfully secured £798,000 to deliver to just over 2,000 children throughout the summer term, and that was working with a network of providers. We have also bid this year for that same money, that was DFE monies, and we've done that in a joint approach alongside Leicester City as well. So we actually put in an application for around 1.5 million, which we hope to hear the outcome of at the end of February, which would be a hugely successful outcome if we were to achieve that. The second one was the Youth Engagement Fund, which addresses the government's violence reduction agenda. And for this, we secured funding through the Youth Engagement Fund, which is funding through the Home Office, and we're working with schools across Leicestershire to look at equipping children to have the better abilities to be able to develop their own resilience and to avoid situations where we were talking earlier about gangs, knife crime, back county lines, developing a child's resilience so that that isn't something that a course of action that they end up taking. Family group conferencing. We were successful with the Department for Education and again have brought that funding in. That's over an 18-month period, and that will mean that the authority will be able to offer family group conferencing services to families pre-proceedings. And the other SIP opportunities are around family group conferences in Northamptonshire. This might sound a little strange because we're in Leicestershire, but under the auspices of the Innovation Partnership, as an authority, you are also able to work with neighbouring authorities and allow for the fact that we've got the expertise within Barnardo's to share family group conferencing services across another authority. So that's very encouraging and exciting. And we have a second piece of work, which is around the Violence Reduction Network, which is a piece of scoping and research work that we're reporting directly to Grace Strong, who's the Violence Reduction Director. So there's been a lot of activity in 1 year, which culminated in new revenue streams of about 1.4 million into the authority, which was over and above the original service design brief that Barnardo's came in to deliver in partnership. So it's been extremely positive in terms of joint working. Next steps are the service design brief to be approved by the board, which has actually happened, and it's included a full business case, and you can see there that it's 2.5 million capital investment and 1.5 million revenue investment. This is to develop new services for the authority, which the aim and intent is to work together to address some of the challenges that have already been identified by colleagues here earlier. A collaboration agreement for the year 2 has now been signed off. The 10-year opportunity for the contracts is a +1 each year, which gives the opportunity, if things aren't working out, that we wouldn't continue with the partnership. But I'm very pleased to say that year 2, it has been signed off and it's looking extremely positive. And we've also agreed the resources for that year 2, thinking about the development opportunities that we've got within the partnership and what additional resources we would need, and that's co-investment by both agencies in year 2. Identify opportunities with the local authorities, which I mentioned, for example, in the Northamptonshire and the extension of the family group conferencing service. And share key learning in the evaluation, which, as I mentioned earlier, which hopefully will be published in February. And we'll then hopefully look also to have an evaluation for year 2, where we can do a deeper dive on what the impact of the partnership has actually been directly on children and families in Leicestershire. The implementation of Service Design Brief 1, which links to the first bullet point, which was the solution to the residential design brief, of which I'm sure there'll be further opportunities to provide greater levels of detail about that. And a partnership to engage in the consultant and to undertake diagnostic for the whole system change, which Jane alluded to earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would it be possible, before we move on to comments and questions, to have the slides circulated to us, please? And also, I think we would want another discussion about this probably some months down the line, if that we can look at that to build it into our forward programme. Thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. That was really interesting and fascinating. I just have a question relating to your success. The one with delivering food during the school holidays. I mean, I think that's absolute marvellous innovation. I understand, is it 2,000 meals? I think I heard you say. 2,000 children. I just wondered if anybody had a clue of how many children in Leicestershire receive free school meals, because that would give an indication of what the actual need is, because I assume every child that's receiving school meals will have difficulties during school holidays. And also, can you sort of tell me how you sort of delivered the food, because all the other success have been via the schools or via Northamptonshire or something, if they don't fold. But this one, I'd like some indication of how you get it out, because I think this is a great innovation.
Okay, answer that, Chair. Firstly, I think that off the top of my head and from memory, I think the free school meals was around the 7,000 figure, which was the target that we looked at originally. So we saturated that to 2,000 children. It was a challenge because it was DFE funding which was rolled out with very, very short amounts of notice. Therefore, we didn't have a great deal of, and this was a national problem, we didn't have a great deal of opportunity to alert schools so that they could therefore alert families that this opportunity was available during the school holidays. The Director General of the DFE actually visited Leicestershire and met with Jane and other colleagues, and we gave that feedback, and I'm pleased to say that this year's funding round was given a much longer lead-in time, so hopefully the saturation will be even greater this time.
Can I ask, just following on from that, and thank you for the answer, how did you select the children, the 2,000 out of the 7,000?
It wasn't a case of selection, it was open to all 7,000. It was a case of which children and families would have known about it, and that was the point I was trying to make about the lead-in time. I think the more lead-in time you have, then the greater you would have in the number of children that would want to come forward. Your second point about the food, we collaborated with Traded Services here in the County Council, so there was an offer from Traded Services to provide food at various sites. Some of the sites were school sites who were willing and able to open their school provision during the school holidays, and other were the voluntary sector who stepped in to also deliver the provision in various community outlets across Leicestershire.
Thank you. Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. My question is also, I think the next bullet point down, the Youth Engagement Fund, 386,000. There was 8 secondary schools. Could you just give me an idea how they were selected, those 8 schools? Thank you.
Yeah, so they were selected using the approach of the Inclusion Partnership. So we decided that it was easier because it basically is a pilot from the Youth Engagement Fund. The funding will come out in cycles over the next 10-year period, I believe. So there'll be an opportunity, hopefully, to extend that wider than just the 8 schools that were selected in one inclusion partnership at this point.
So if it's something that, as you say, will continue, then it doesn't necessarily have to go back to those 8 schools. It can be around the county or selected.
Yes.
Spreading. Thank you.
Mrs. Taylor.
I just wanted to pick up on Mr. Kaufman's comments there. I think what isn't highlighted there was also the expansion of not just the feeding the 2,000, but we had families coming together with children, with their parents and with their carers that were learning how to cook healthy food together. So I think it was a lot more wider than just that. It really did involve the families. When I went to the feedback at Bow Manor Hall, it was, the providers were. So I think it's a lot wider than was highlighted there.
Wasn't a criticism, I was just gathering information, but well done.
Thank you very much. I think we've all found this most helpful and most useful, and would like to congratulate you all on how it's working at the moment so smoothly, and long may it continue. Well, at least for another few years, as we know. But thank you very much. And taking up, as I said earlier, if we can book this into the forward programme to have a future report, probably after this year, and see how it's worked. Maybe this time next year or something like that. And the slides to be circulated to us. Thank you very much, and thank you. Thank you. Go back to where we were on the agenda. So we're now moving to item 9, which is the report on the Ofsted inspection, and this, finally I can say it, is where we will be working from this buff paper, Road to Excellence, and not the one that's in your pack. So thank you very much, and I move on to back to you, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, apologies. We circulated the not the most recent draft of the action plan. So the one that you've got attached is our most recent draft of our action plan.
Will you be able to share with one on either side? It was, I think they were posted out to us last week. Okay. Taylor's manual. You got one that they can access. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide the outcome of the recent Ofsted inspection of children's social care services in Leicestershire, and also to present the action plan that you now have that addresses the recommendations in the Ofsted report. So just by way of background and to remind members, Ofsted undertakes the inspection of local authority children's services on all local authority areas with the statutory responsibility for delivering children's services. And the inspection framework inspects the local authority's services for children in need of help and protection, children in care and care leavers, and the effectiveness of leaders and managers and the impact they have on the lives of children and young people, and also the quality of professional practice. So the last full inspection of the County Council Children's Services was undertaken in November 2016, when all the services were requiring improvement were graded as requiring improvement to be good. Following the 2016 action plan inspection, a comprehensive action plan was created in order to drive the improvements that were identified as part of the action plan in key areas across the department. And again, members will recall from the presentations previously, this was set up as a 4-year plan to take account of the breadth and depth of the work required following the inspection. In November 2018, a focus visit was undertaken by Ofsted at our front door, and the conclusion of that was that services had improved from November 2016. So in relation to our most recent Ofsted inspection, it was carried out over the 3-week period from the 16th of September to the 4th of October, and it involved 8 inspectors. And the inspectors read case files, they met with some of our staff, they also met with leaders in the department and considered our self-assessment and also the improvement journey since the inspection in 2016. So the findings from the inspection are detailed in the report that we've attached to this report, and it includes gradings indicating how the service is judged to be performing in 4 broad areas. To date, in relation to overall effectiveness, around 13% of councils in England have been graded as inadequate, 35% require improvement to be good, 36.5% are good, and 15.5% are outstanding. Following the inspection, Leicestershire has now been graded as follows. In relation to the impact of leaders on social work practice with children and families, we're now graded good. In relation to the experiences and progress of children who need help and protection, we still remain requiring improvement to be good. In relation to the experiences and progress of children in care and care leavers, we're good. In relation to our overall effectiveness, we still require improvement to be good. So if I can just pick out for you the report headlines and then go on to the strengths and also areas for improvement. So when Ofsted came in, they did identify that progress had been made across many areas of the department since the last inspection in 2016. But it did acknowledge that while services for children in care and care leavers are now judged to be good, those services for children needing help and protection still require some further improvement. And the report further emphasised that overall children aren't receiving a consistently good practice service across the department, and also that the extent of the remaining areas for improvement was such that the overall effectiveness for the department remained as requiring improvement to be good. So in relation to our strengths, Ofsted did recognise that there would have been significant commitment and investment by political and corporate leaders across the organisation, and that together with effective work by staff within the department and senior managers, it has meant that responses to the needs of children and families have improved in many areas across children's services. And they particularly picked out the successes around our early help services, that children receive a timely and effective response when they need help and protection, particularly at evenings and weekends. It was identified as a strength in our out-of-hours service, and that we take swift action to ensure that children are protected, and with those children at risk of immediate harm are seen early and initial assessment of their needs are undertaken promptly. They also identified that disabled children who need help and protection receive a good service, and inspectors were also impressed with our vulnerability hub that provides a service to children who are at risk of harm from sexual exploitation or criminal exploitation, as well as those children who go missing from home and from care. Inspectors did praise the effective systems we've got in place to monitor the welfare of children who are electively home educated, and they also said that most of our children in care and care leavers are making good progress, they're settled in good homes, and that the needs are well met, and that their lives are better because of the improved services provided through the department. They recognise that our social workers have manageable caseloads, and they also recognise the significant strengths of our fostering and adoption services, and they were identified by inspectors as being very strong. And then finally, they did identify that our care leavers live in suitable accommodation, and that the majority are participating in education, training, employment, and that as a local authority, we have high aspirations for our children in care and our care leavers. In terms of the areas for improvement, Ofsted did identify a number of areas that still required improvement, and some of those were around the quality or variability of social work practice. They noted that the plans for children in need or at risk didn't always state the specific actions that were required to be taken. They also considered that permanence planning was significantly weaker for children who needed options other than adoption, and they also commented on the quality or the consistent quality of supervision of social workers as well. So in the report this time, they set out 6 recommendations for improvement, and those were around the timeliness of assessments, the timeliness of work to secure positive change for children, particularly during the pre-proceedings stage of public law, and the quality and consistency of social work practice in care planning. They also identified the need to improve our case recording to enable new workers to quickly understand a child's history and their circumstances. And they also picked up on the need for us to improve our permanency planning for children whose plan is not adoption. And then finally, they were wanting us to do some more work around monitoring of the quality and appropriateness of alternative education provision for our children in care. So we are required to produce an action plan for Ofsted, and we've attached that action plan. You've now got copies of it in front of you. This action plan is not going to be delivered in isolation from our current continuous improvement plan, which I said at the beginning set out a 4-year plan following the 2016 inspection. So this action plan will become part of our 4-year continuation plan, and as previously reported, we're 3 years into that 4-year plan. And as we reported at Scrutiny, I think it was back in September, we did highlight there were still a number of actions still to complete. And these actions are reflected in the report from Ofsted in 2019. So they agreed with what we thought we were, where we thought we were at in terms of our journey of continuous improvement. And again, just as a reminder, we did set out a 4-year plan in 2016 due to the scale of change required following the 2016 action inspection. So that attached plan that you've now got in front of you will form part of the continuous improvement plan, which will be reviewed at the end of the 4 years, which will be in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I move to people who are wishing to speak, as this is going to be part of the continuous improvement plan, which will then be a new one from next year, is it possible that you could come back to us later this year to discuss where we're up to and how we're moving forward to the new plan?
Yes, our intention is that we'll build the reporting of this action plan into our reporting on our continuous improvement plan. And I think the next report will be due to come back here in September.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you, Chair. So, how much of the action plan is a response to the latest Ofsted inspection findings, and how much of it is rounding off the 4-year plan from the 2016 report?
So the action plan that you've got in front of you is the action plan that is in direct response to the outcome of the Ofsted inspection, and it will now form part of our continuous improvement plan.
So from that, there's plenty, if not entirely all of this, is new, but it fits in with the original plan. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, not exactly. All these areas, as Jane outlined, which are areas for development, were areas that we had identified with Ofsted as part of our self-assessment, were things that we were working on. So they were all part of the 2 key areas that we were looking at, that Scrutiny have seen before, which are around supervision and management oversight, and around the quality of practice and care planning. We have broken down the detail of those themes into addressing the 6 recommendations that Ofsted have made, but none of the recommendations that Ofsted have made were a surprise to us. There were things that we were sharing with Ofsted as to where we are on our journey.
Okay, I'm trying to go at this from a different angle then. So has Ofsted, in its most recent visit, added anything much of significance in terms of where you were heading anyway?
No, they have supported that we're on the right track with the areas of development that we're making.
Mr. Welsh.
I suspect I'm more conscious of the action plan in that we didn't get to good, and I think we all hoped we would, although we've made significant improvements. So I think members will want to track this quite a lot, because we want to try and get to where I know we were trying to do it in 3 years effectively, and we were looking for 4. But I'm reading the first one of the action plan about timeliness of assessments, and I've read on page 48 of the Ofsted report where they're talking about children not at immediate risk of harm and what they found, and the lack of urgency in progressing actions. And I'm looking at this, and lots of it is talking about measures and targets and improvements in targets and how we're doing that now, but there isn't a great deal about what are we actually changing to allow that to happen, or certainly nothing that as a layperson I understand. So on here, where would I look to see what are the changes we're making? There's no point shouting at social workers saying do it quicker, do it quicker. Clearly we're changing the process, and I just struggle to see clarity in what changes we're making.
Strolled.
I can't speak for the officers' chair, and I wouldn't even try to. But when you look at the draft action plan and you see reference to smart targets, they were not there when we were inspected in 2016. So it's an ongoing document subject basically to continuous review. And when we had the lead member meeting this week, which was only yesterday, we had performance figures that very closely copy the areas that are identified in the action plan. So all I can say to the committee is, from my perspective, what you've got written in front of you, if it's delivered, ought to get us to outstanding. And I still remain puzzled by the fact that we were not given a good grading this time, when I know that other authorities who've had 2 goods in the 3 basic areas ended up with a good grading. That is a big disappointment to me. That's no reflection on our officers, because they've worked their socks off. But you ought to be reassured when you turn over and you see things like outcomes that are very highly detailed, and also the progress. If I turn to embedding excellent practice, you'll note that the target figure is 90%, and for the end of this year is 80%. We're currently at 73, but it started at 36. So that is some change over a period of time.
I think that was helpful, and there is no doubt I can see I'm just looking at the front one, as I said, I can see where improvement is happening. I would have just expected in the action plan to see some detail about not just what the target is or what we're doing, but what changes are we making, and how do we get and embed the ability of the team to meet those targets. But maybe I'm not looking at it well.
I try to answer that. In relation to targets and performance targets, and accepting everything you say about what's making the change, what we need to do for what Ofsted have told us and we are aware of is that when children are at risk of harm, our response to those children is immediate, and it's effective and it's efficient, and that is really, really positive. For those children where they are considered to need an assessment as a child in need, that what we need to do consistently, because this wasn't with all those children, consistently, is to make sure that the timeliness of our assessments of those children's needs are in line with the other children. So where you've got a target, or where we've got a target of the number of assessments that are completed within 45 days, the more children that we can make sure that assessment is completed within that time scale, and we've got a clear understanding of their needs and are therefore able to put a clear plan in place, that will help us see that there is no delay. So for all this group of children, what Ofsted was saying to us, it's not that we weren't identifying the needs, it's not that we were missing those needs, it was that for some of those children it was taking us longer than the 45 days that we are required and measured against. For all of them, not for all of them, but for some of them, it was taking us longer than that to complete that assessment. So this target, this change and this monitoring of this target will enable us to be reassured that those children's needs are assessed and identified at that earliest stage. The things that are built around to support that is all the work that we've brought to committee, that we've been doing about recruitment and retention, to make sure we've got the right staff, right experience, right level, with the right management oversight, that are ensuring that we're driving that practice. So all those things, and that's why not one of these recommendations in our continuous improvement plan is looked at in isolation. And when we've put here that recommendation 1 links to taking the right action at the right time for children. Hopefully you'll remember that when we've come with the bigger Road to Excellence plan, that is one of our key areas. So these recommendations feed into that whole cultural system service change, and do include things like supervision, management oversight. We will see children with assessments that are completed, a higher rate that are completed within 45 days. We will see smart plans in place for children. It all connects.
I think what I'm hearing, Chair, is that to look at this in isolation without the rest of the improvement plan is probably a little limiting. And there will undoubtedly be occasions where, as scrutineers, we can look at the overall picture. So that did make sense, so thank you for that, Sharon. But I look forward to the clarity that I would hope that we can see. So thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Seaton.
A comment on the action plan. It does point out what actions are being taken there, and a part of the recommendations was to improve recording and make it more consistent. Now, I did think I wasn't going to get a clarity for this paragraph here because I thought I might look a bit silly. But I've decided, what the heck, I'll go for it anyway. Because I want a bit of clarity on the, it's Action Plan 1, and it's the further actions in progress. As the service manager will ensure consistency of recording on born, as they should be marked as seen. Could you just clarify that, please? Sorry, it's the first page, and it's the 3rd point down at the further action in progress.
Oh, right, yes, yeah. So what sorry. What we need to ensure is that when we are completing an assessment that's a pre-birth assessment, that we are noting that the child has actually been seen. So some authorities, and we do on some occasions, know that we've seen the mum and the mum's pregnant, and for a pre-birth, because we need to know whether the child's seen, that we have effectively seen the pregnant mum. And we needed to make sure that we were doing that consistently, because sometimes people were saying, well, until baby's actually born, you can't actually say that baby has been seen. But we were out of kilter with what other authorities, and actually that we were doing something, we were seeing the mother, and we were then disadvantaged because some authorities were clicking that they've seen baby because they've seen pregnant mum.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the report. And I think I speak on behalf of all of us, is that I thank you very much, and all of you that we don't see behind the scenes presenting this, so that we do, on the whole, understand and we see where we're going forward, and we look forward to a future report in the autumn. Thank you. We're now moving on to item 10, which is the local area inspection of special education needs and disabilities. And again, it's, I think it's you, Jane, or Sharon, or Paula, even. Yes, if I read my notes, it does say Paula in bright red letters.
Thank you, Chair. I'll briefly run through the highlights of the report. So obviously the purpose of this report is to provide the committee with an overview of the inspection framework for services relating to special educational needs and disabilities, and also to provide members with a summary of what we believe are our areas' strengths and areas that require further development. For the purposes of this inspection, it is undertaken by by Ofsted and the Care Quality Commission. So it is a joint inspection, and it's an inspection of the area, which in summary means the local authority, the clinical commissioning group and schools, although schools are not inspected but are visited in detail as part of the inspection. The primary focus of the inspection is to review how local areas support children and young people with special educational needs and or disabilities to achieve the best possible outcomes, some of which are things like being able to live independently in the future, secure meaningful employment and be well prepared for their adult lives. Paragraph 8 of the report talks about the scope in slightly more detail of the inspection. It is an inspection of the geographical area of the local authority, that is Leicestershire. However, the responsibility of the local area for children and young people of special educational needs extends to those who are residents of the local area but potentially could attend educational establishments or receive services outside of the local authority area. The inspection will be provided with 5 working days notice of the inspection, and it probably isn't 5 working days notice of the inspection, more likely 5 days before the inspectors arrive, because from the Monday when we receive the call there will be significant requests from inspectors for key documents and key data, which we'll be providing to them during that week, as well as responding to any inquiries, questions and setting up the logistics which for the following week when inspectors arrive. During the inspection they will visit at least one early years setting, one primary school and one secondary school at least, a special school, an FE college and potentially, time permitting, an independent provider of special educational services. They will meet with staff and governors within school settings, and most importantly children and young people and parents and carers, and they will speak at length with the Leicestershire Parent Carer Forum. Unlike an Ofsted inspection that we've just discussed, we don't get a judgment, but what the Ofsted and the CQC will do is publish an inspection report in the form of a letter. It will, like I mentioned earlier, there'll be no inspection judgment, but it will be addressed to both the local authority and the chief executive of the clinical commissioning group. And as with many other inspections, it will outline a summary of their key findings, summary of key strengths within the local area, and those areas that require further development. So what you get is a potentially you can get a letter that says, or a report that says you are fulfilling your statutory duties to a standard that they're comfortable with, or they may provide us with a written statement of action. And if you look at paragraph 14 within the report on page 67, it gives you a summary of how those inspections have gone in other areas, but the areas that are receiving written statements of action, certainly in this last year, up to date, there has been more towards those that are receiving written statements of action have increased over time. If we do get a written statement of action, we do have to present a plan within 70 working days of receiving that report. From page 67 and 68 is where we've summarised for the committee, from which we've pulled from our self-evaluation framework, our strengths. From paragraph 29 onwards on page 69 is where we've highlighted our areas for development. I don't intend, Chair, on going through all of those. I've taken those as read, but obviously happy to take some questions. I would like to add in relation to paragraph 31, where we've talked about children being educated outside of the county and in independent provision. We've also recognised, since we've written this report, as we've been refreshing our self-evaluation, is that we need to work better with mainstream schools to help them improve their special educational needs support, which is the offer before a child needs a statutory assessment or plan. So I suppose to kind of summarise, whilst we know there are a number of key areas for development in Leicestershire, we have responded well to the reforms introduced in 2014 in terms of compliance. We have recognised our areas for development certainly over the last 18 months, and what we have is, as you'll be aware, is a substantial high needs development plan which covers the areas of development that are in here in quite some detail. So we're confident that inspectors, that we are aware of our current status, aware of our current performance, and that inspectors we will be on the same page as inspectors when they arrive. So I think to summarise, we're well prepared for the inspection, and it is imminent, and there's a year left of this current inspection cycle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I move to questions from Mr. Sheehan and any others, can I just ask myself, and on the one you've just highlighted, paragraph 31 on page 69, when it says too many children are educated outside of the county, there are certain areas of our county where the parents and the nearest live in a village or a settlement, and the nearest secondary school for that catchment is in another county. So if, for example, I can mention one which is Hathern, and their nearest, or the ones they're recommended to go to, is the one in Eastleek. Now, if that happens and it is a child with special needs, or SEND, that's not our fault, is it? Because the nearest school in the county is miles away. Do you see what I mean? So they would still be included as being outside the county, but that is because of where they can go.
I think what we're referring to specifically here is where children can be educated within, or should be, we should be able to provide provision within the local county. And for those, we're referring to specialist provision, which I think is what you're referring to. So the children that are being educated outside of the county that we refer to in this paragraph are where needs can't be met within the county, not necessarily about catchment. And that is why we've kind of carried on in that paragraph talking about the provision of 600 additional places as part of the capital programme to help address that. So there will always be children, for the reasons that you talk about, where catchment is appropriate for them to move into that area.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just briefly say that I look forward to receiving the judgment from the inspector at Scrutiny in due course. But what I'm really interested in is paragraph 35. I'd just like to ask the top table if they think EHCPs are on the way out.
No, education, health and care plans were introduced as part of the SEND reforms in 2014, so there's no intention at the moment to review that again. They were pulled together specifically to ensure that local authorities and partners are taking a holistic view of children, so hence the education, health and care plan element of it. And there is absolutely no indication that there's any intention to remove them. What we do know is that nationally the numbers of education, health and care plans are significantly increasing.
I'm sorry, but in paragraph 35 it says the government is ordering a wholesale review of SEND. So does that not mean EHCPs might change significantly?
I mean, I wouldn't be able to predict the outcome of the whole system review, but indeed the government have instructed a SEND review, part of which will look at the education, health and care plan system, but there are other elements to the provisions within that review, and I wouldn't want to second guess what the outcome of that review would be.
Our lead member have any thoughts on this?
Thank you, Chair. I think the lead member is brain dead on this subject.
Sorry, Chair. Could I just respond to Mr. Sheehan's comments about a judgment? We won't receive a judgment. There won't be a judgment like good, outstanding, requires improvement. You don't receive that, but the outcome we will obviously share.
In fairness to Sean, because I couldn't resist being naughty, I apologise for that. On Monday of next week, I'm in London. F40, which I still belong to on the executive, are meeting with the chair of the National Send Board, 11 o'clock to 12:30, to discuss the pressures on local authorities in general with the overspend. You've already had it outlined in the paper on the medium-term financial strategy. I do think there will have to be some changes brought in because there is clear evidence that not all of the partners are paying their way, and particularly there's evidence on how you define and then get funding for the medical side of the equation. So that will come out on Monday. Outside of this meeting, I'm very happy to let you know what happens in that meeting.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on, no more points, to item 11, which is the care leaver offer. And I believe it's Sharon Cook, the Assistant Director for Children's Social Care, and Angie Limer-Cox, or is that Limer-Cox, the Placement Service Manager. Thank you very much. And this is on page 73.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll give an overview of the report and then I'll hand over to both Nikki Collins, who's the Head of Service, and Angie Limer-Cox, who's the Service Manager. So this report has been provided to give the committee an overview of the activity of the County Council in our support and responsibilities and duties to care leavers. So they are young people who've been in the care of the local authority prior to being 18, and our duties and responsibilities to those young people up to and including now the age of 25. The report outlines the statutory responsibilities that we have to this group of young people, and then looks to outline particular areas and the detail of those areas and the progress that we've made. Before I hand over to Angie and Nikki, I would just like to highlight our thanks to the committee for the work and support around the 5-member panel for scrutiny that worked with us last year to review our corporate parenting offer, look at the duties and responsibilities both of elected members and what the county council and officers were doing, and are really pleased that the recommendations and support of the committee in identifying elected member champions who will help us take forward 3 key areas for our care leavers. So those key areas around housing and accommodation, are around education and employment and training, and then thirdly around health and well-being. So I wanted to note for the committee our thanks around that work. If I hand over to Nikki and Angie, they can take you through the details, and obviously I'll come back and answer any questions.
Hi. So so you've had the report, so just a summary of what we've written in the report. So in 2016, as you've heard earlier, we had Ofsted visit, and they found that within the care leaver service there was a gap in the support we were offering to young people leaving care. So they were saying such things as a lack of management oversight and young people not being aware of their entitlements. So as part of the continuous improvement plan, a road to excellence, work was identified to improve the service. There was significant investment financially by the department, ensuring adequate staffing as well as resources to support young people financially and emotionally. Then in January 19, some of the highlight visits we've had. So in January 19, Mark Riddell, who's the National advisor for care leavers to the Department of Education, visited LCC, and whilst acknowledging the progress being made, identified 17 recommendations which are in your report. In November 19, Mark returned and noted the rapid progress we had and the strong offer we have for care leavers, and by the end of this visit he mentioned he felt we were in the top 10 most improved local authorities. In November 19 we also then received the visit from Ofsted and to carry out our ordinary 3-yearly inspection, and they found children in care services, which includes care leavers, to be rated as good. So the care leavers team, most of you all know, is based within the Children in Care service alongside children in care and unaccompanied asylum seekers, which has enabled us to provide a continuous service to children as they go through care into becoming a care leaver, often with the same workers throughout that time to build those relationships. So the Care Leavers service has an offer to care leavers, which has been sent to all young people once that became mandatory, and continues to be sent to them on their 18th and their 21st birthday to ensure they understand their entitlement as part of the letter from the director celebrating those significant birth dates. And this ensures that young people are aware of their rights and entitlements as care leavers, and it covers the support from such issues as contact with their family members, but also in terms of going to university, holiday funding and stuff like that. So we also have a website now which outlines that for care leavers, that they can access themselves through the internet. In 2016, Keep On Caring research was published, which identified the need for agencies to work together to support care leavers, and we work with virtual school and local and national businesses, for example Amazon, as well as local charities such as the LGBT Centre in Leicester, and that's to ensure young people of all parts of our services receive the appropriate support. There are 2 significant protocols developed over the last 12 months, one with the districts around a housing offer, and that is currently being signed off. And also one with the DWP, which looks at job coaches, ensuring that young people are working towards being work ready if they're not ready to do so, and to sign on with benefits in a timely manner if they're going to be taking that route, whether they're in college or unemployed at that time. A significant impact, even though currently the housing protocol hasn't been signed off, is the exemption from council tax for care leavers up to the age of 25, and we found that significantly important because the districts actually agreed that as outside of the protocol being signed off, so that's actually implemented since April the 1st last year. So over this year we started the process of the 3-member champions for care leavers, as Sharon's just touched on, and that allowed a level of scrutiny as well as advice and support around health and wellbeing, education and accommodation. And we've already had some briefings with 2 of the people that were going to be member support for that, and then one is still being set up. And we've had significant developments around apprenticeships in the local authority, enabling young people within the family business, as it were, to gain opportunities. We've got 5 apprentices currently working and 1 due to start on the 4th of February. We've also got opportunities developed with conversations being started with the districts around what support might be out there and what roles might be out actually in the districts rather than just within County Hall. And Tony will speak later, but I'm aware that they are looking at the company that's going to be working on Snibston as to whether or not there's opportunities there for young people to be working as part of that. Throughout all of the work we do, we make sure the voice of the young people is evident and out there and visible. And where possible, we engage them in developments around policies and futures of the service. We continue to look at increasing the resource capacity to provide young people with extra support. They may need, for example, when they attend university, and there is currently some financial requests going through scrutiny and then being signed off as part of the overall budget expenditure, to include things like young people at university who want Christmas and Easter funded accommodation, which is over and above our statutory duty. So there is obviously a cost to that. That's all being looked at currently. So that's a summary of the report for our last 12 months of care leavers offer. Oh.
You wanted to add to it?
Only just a final comment is to say what really stuck for me is that Ofsted reported they felt our care leaver staff go above and beyond their duties for all our care leavers. And I've witnessed some of that, you know, our personal advisors who work in their team. We have 2 social workers and personal advisors. You know, when we've had young people in hospital, they've been with them till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, refused to leave, saying no parent would leave, I'm not leaving, even though we've had other people who could have relieved them. Just absolutely giving what I think is 110% service in terms of commitment and really owning their role as parent.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great report. I just wanted to clarify what you were saying about Snibston. Is that the site of the museum as was, or is that the scheduled ancient monument that is still the colliery buildings?
Yeah, I've got to use the microphone. So it's the site that was the colliery, I think, is where they're looking at. I could ask my... Sorry? The country park work. Yeah, yeah.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. I've enjoyed reading this report and I feel happy about it. But there is mention here about housing, and it's not what I read in the report, but it's what I've been picking up in the newspapers, that some young people of this age have been, some local authorities somewhere have been putting children in most unsuitable accommodation. Are we happy that all of our people that we're looking after are in suitable accommodation and we wouldn't be on the list that the papers are telling me about?
If I take that answer, if you look at paragraph 30, that will tell you that 90.4%, so that's 94 out of 104 of our care leavers are in suitable accommodation. We don't just that is a really that we stand really well against statistical neighbours and outstanding authorities with that percentage, but we don't sit and think, what about the other children, young people that aren't in suitable accommodation? The criteria for not being in suitable accommodation could be a young person who's in hospital at that time, could be a young person who's in custody, it could be a young person who is living with a friend and that is not their permanent address. So it's not that they're in an unsafe situation, it's until they have their own tenancy. So that would be, we look at every month that those young people. Angie provides for the senior management team where we are with that figure, and she also provides reassurance and looks at any youngster that is classed not to be in suitable accommodation and provides an update against those young people for us to consider.
Thank you. So we've got no one in a travel lodge somewhere, or you're happy about every... Okay, thanks.
I hope you're not implying that the travel lodge is not up to standard. I wouldn't like us to be. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to say that I think this is an excellent news. I think we should be broadcasting it from the rooftops. Sometimes people are only interested outside this building in negativity. This is so positive, and I think working with our other partners across the county and elsewhere, especially, I'm very, very keen on apprenticeships or internships, whatever you'd like to call them. And I know in another place I have an interest in when we're doing outside contracts and procurement. Part of it is, are they going to have apprenticeships and do they follow them through? So thank you very much. Mrs. Taylor, you wanted to...
Just very quickly, just to highlight in there that nearly 98% of our care leavers are actually in touch with the authority, which I think shows that they do really value the support that we give them and they know where to come if they're in need. So I think that's a really positive as well.
I tend to agree. I think we've probably got a higher ratio of people, of young carers, people coming to willing to talk to us, than some people will go and talk to their parents.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
Thank you. But we also need to give credit where credit's due. We've obviously got the correct staff in place to allow those young people to feel comfortable and secure in the knowledge that they will be helped if they contact. So thank you to those staff.
Right, we've already had item 12, so we're now moving to item 13, which is the report on pupils missing out on education in Leicestershire. And this time I have Alison Bradley, the Head of Service, Education, Quality and Inclusion. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Just to give sort of a brief highlight on the report. The report is being delivered on the back of the Forgotten Children's report that was shared in November 2018. The report that we're sharing today is really Leicestershire's position in terms of those statutory functions for young people who are missing out on education, categorised as children missing out on education, elective home education, children with medical needs and those at risk of exclusion. The report follows on the recommendations of the Timpson report, and the report captures data, termly trends in there, the census data that we have, but really summarises Leicestershire's position and its response to this, and in particular the review of those services I've highlighted in terms of statutory functions to form the inclusion service. The inclusion service also fits with other information that's been discussed in earlier agenda items with the high needs block work, so it's very much enmeshed in terms of that going forward. I'll take questions on that.
Could I just make one request? Could you move your microphone nearer to you, man? Thank you very much.
Mr. Walsh.
I found it a very interesting read and lots of information there. One of the hardest things is sifting out so much information. But in terms of, I'm just a bit concerned about identification of children missing out on education. And one case that I got involved in, a temporary worker was involved in the child's case and had recorded that the child was receiving home education. And that wasn't the case. The child's now all sorted. We did it very quickly, and they're at Mapplewell, very happy. But I was just a bit troubled about, do children who we've marked as home educated, do we actually check in any way that they're not just been permanently excluded and left and ignored, or that they've slipped through our net? Is there, just a simple check of speaking to the family?
So just to clarify, we get data drops from all the schools that are given to us on a monthly basis on all those categories. So that young person that you're referring to, if they came through on elective home education and wrongly onto that, then the first line of inquiry would be we triangulate that with other data sources that we've got. Are they a looked after young person? Have they got an education and healthcare plan? Are they on a CP plan? Are they child in need? And then there's a contact that's had with the family. So we would clarify at that point, are they officially electively home educated or are they missing and it's been wrongly categorised?
Thank you very much for a very interesting report and plenty of things for us to read, and thank you very much. We now move on to the final item, which is the update on the virtual school. And I hope I don't have to declare an interest that I did purchase 6 books and 2 calendars from the virtual school before Christmas. So it is noted in I didn't receive them as gifts, I did pay for them, and I didn't claim for it. Right, I have, and I have given it.
They were the same.
No, but I gave them away. Right, this is one of my favourite reports, as we all know. This is usually excellent news, so I welcome Tony Barnard and, of course, Jane presenting Sharon is presenting this one with Tony. Thank you.
I'll hand over to Tony as virtual head of the virtual school, just basically to introduce the report that outlines the statutory responsibilities of the local authority around a virtual head and virtual school. But Tony will take you through the details, and as you've just said, Chair, some really positive work and some really positive results for some of our young people.
Right, thank you. The report which you have before you, it really gives an update on what's been happening most recently and some of the new developments which we are anticipating in the future. The new developments which are likely to be influencing how we perform as a virtual school are listed here, and we have got the Simpson exclusion review, which was alluded to by Alison Bradley a moment ago, and then we also have, which I haven't put down here, the review of children in need, because that's something which is in addition to our current responsibilities to looked after children and previously looked after children. There is a move now which is likely to be introduced this year for virtual school heads to take some responsibility for children in need as well. But that's yet to be officially confirmed. So the developments which we're looking at in relation to the virtual school and more directly at home, if you like, is in relation to the Ofsted inspection, and one of the items which is identified in relation to the targets that we had there was regarding the quality assurance of alternative provision attended by looked after children. And although the report recognising that suitable plans were in place to address that circumstance, what we've started to do now is to talk to other services within the local authority to ensure that there is a consistent approach across services with the commissioning team, with SENA and with education quality, to ensure that the expectations of all those services are the same in relation to what schools are commissioning and what actions they will be taking when they directly commission alternative provision. The secondary education inclusion partnerships, we know what their processes are and they've been agreed with the local authority, so that's something which we have less of a concern about. But as I say, we have got a drafted proposal in relation to how we approach schools when they are commissioning alternative provision, and we're presenting that through the Leicestershire Secondary Heads Forum, working with them. Moving on from that, you can see that the list of the activities which have taken place during the academic year 2019-20, that's paragraphs 23 onwards, and the different things which we have used Pupil Premium Plus for, as well as obviously providing majority of that funded to schools. A top sliced amount is kept back and pulled in order to provide for those pupils who have additional needs, more needs than perhaps many of our children do. So those more complex cases where the needs of those children exceed what the £2,300 allocated per capita would be able to provide. So say we top slice 2,300 from 2,300 £400, and then we can allocate that where additional resources are required for individual students. Then looking on at some of the other activities which have been supported by us, you can see on paragraph 33 a number of different events which we participated in. In addition to that, we've had a glass workshop towards the end of last year where children were able to learn new skills in relation to glass blowing and manufacturing their own clocks, which on different themes in a glass workshop, and then various activities there which are ongoing and will be continuing with those new university visits, etc. Next month with the primary visit to university. One thing which I did want to highlight is the conference which ties in with our training programme, and this is something which very much aligns, I feel, with what's been already mentioned with regards to being proactive and in preventing development of those more perhaps complex circumstances in school, and supporting schools to keep children in school and to support them in relation to mental health issues, and in particular in relation to a report which was published just last week by the Centre for Mental Health. They produced the briefing on trauma, challenging behaviour and restrictive interventions in school. So the conference that we have on the 27th of February is going to be having two keynote speakers, one of whom is a former looked after child who can speak about it from her perspective, about how the things at school did either supported her or perhaps weren't so supportive, and then having a head of learning in an academy trust who's going to be speaking about how policies and ethos in a school can be can affect and be effective in relation to vulnerable children and the behaviours which they see and how they deal with behaviours. So that's something which I think we're all looking forward to on the 27th of February. Of course, everything that we do, we want to have a positive outcome on children in care and care leavers. One of my bywords, I suppose, is if it's not having an impact directly on a young person, then why are we doing it? And so what we want to make sure is that the activities that we undertake always have an impact on young people and support positive outcomes for them. And of course, positive outcomes are related to, as alluded to just now, mental health issues, social and emotional well-being, but obviously there are other aspects, outcomes at the end of Key Stage 4, so we're talking about academic outcomes as well. Whilst acknowledging that a child needs to be, if you like, psychologically, mentally or emotionally in a place where they can access learning, it's important to be able to build on that for them to be able to access learning and to take their exams and to achieve qualifications to help them move on to independent living after their childhood when they enter adulthood. And so you'll see that there's an overview of Key Stage test and examination results here, which are still provisional, but they will be more fully reported on in the Virtual School Annual Report in a couple of months' time. One thing which I do want to add to that is that as of today we now have 17 young people who are engaged in higher education, so at universities, and so that's a very pleasing aspect. So really it's over to you and any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Tony. As always, an excellent report and really interesting to know. I've just asked if for the conference, if anybody wanted to go from here, would they just get in touch with yourself?
Just get in contact with myself or the generic Virtual School email address, please, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a bit of feedback for Tony, really, and for the staff. I'm a governor of a primary school that has got looked after children in it, and I went in for my annual visit, and they were praising the virtual school. And make sure I get this right, they particularly praised that your guys went in and did some training on attachment, and it was very welcome indeed. So thank you.
I thank you for your comments, and just to say that we do get feedback after all of our training sessions, and the feedback is always 99%, if not 100%. People would recommend it to others, and they thought it either good or excellent.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's anything else. I'd like... Oh, Mr. Phillips.
It's all news to me, so I'm only just arrived as a county. But doesn't paragraph 62 say absolutely everything?
Absolutely, and obviously we're all continuously striving to maintain those figures. Yeah.
It only remains for me to say that the next meeting of this committee is on the 3rd of March at 2 o'clock, and I thank you all very much for attending, and safe journey home.